I acknowledge with gratitude that we are starting this press conference from the traditional territory of Algonquin peoples, given that so much of what we do is now taking place virtually. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional territories on which you may be. With us today, to start this event in a good way, we are joined by Elders Claudette Commanda, David Chartrand, and Verna de Montigny. It is an honor for me to introduce Elder Commanda. She is an Algonquin Anishinaabe from Kitigang, Zibi, and Anishinaabe First Nation. She is an educator and orator of traditional knowledge of her people. Elder Commanda has dedicated the last 30 years to promoting First Nations peoples' history, cultures, and rights in various capacities. Elder Commanda, over to you. Sound? Good sound, please.
Good morning.
Whoa.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Indigenous leaders, elders, ministers. Hwe kakina. Pijaj Boma, Anishinaabe Aki, Oma Wenaniwak. Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue à la territoire de mes ancêtres, la nation algonquin. I welcome everyone to the beautiful ancestral homeland of the Algonquin people. Je vais faire une prière dans la langue. Vous êtes tous inclus dans cette bénédiction. I will say a prayer in my language, and everyone is included in this prayer. And the sacred medicine has been lit because we ask all the grandfathers and the grandmothers to bless, to help, and we say thank you to the Creator. And I ask that you say your prayer in your language and in a way that you believe. Mi wedge kishiminado, mi wedge onje no, mi wedge onje kakina, mi wedge kinagiego mishomis, das binigen kokomisa, das binigen mishomsa. Mi wedge jojo aki, kokomis tipegizis, mishomis gizis, mi wedge. Ni bok sendam, onje, kakina, mashkawizi win, mino pomadzi win, ashish mino ikado win. And nabigis gijiminado, we dopushnang, kakina, nongum, ashishwabam. Migwej gijiminado, migwej onje, kinuin emiawin. Niboksendam kakina endaso kijig. Niboksendam gijiminado kakina, onje. Nibakawin, zagiedwin. Manaji toawin, akodedwin. Giwi kod wa diziwin. Diba dendiziwin ashish debwewin. Mi gwej gijiminado onji mishomis kinomagewin. Creator, we thank you for bringing us together. We thank you for your help. And Creator, we call upon you and our grandmothers and our grandfathers, our ancestors and our relatives to guide this work of the Declaration of Indigenous Peoples. And Creator, as we continue to walk this road in the work that is being done for the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that Creator, that we remember the people, the children, our relatives here, our relatives in the spirit world. And this work will be done in collaboration with good respect, kindness, and love from both Indigenous peoples and the Government of Canada and Canadians, that it is done so in good thought, prayer, and respect for the Indigenous peoples of this land. Chimi wedge gijiminado onji kinuin ebiawin miigwech. Thank you, Chris. Now on to Elder David Miigwech.
We are also joined by Elder David Sakai. Elder Saga is Inuit from Nulatin Lake, Nunavut southwest of Akiviat. He is a drum dancer, retired teacher, storyteller, and keeper of Inuit language and culture. He has helped to develop Inuktitut language teaching materials at all levels, local, regional, and territorial. Elder Sokak is past president and founder of the Inuit Relocation Society and esteemed member of the Inuit community. Elder Sokak, over to you.
Okay, good morning.
Oops, Lord.
I'm not.
It wants me to download.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Oh, okay. Video part is out, but I'll start anyway. So thank you for inviting me. My name is David Chartrand. Traditionally, when Inuit gather in a small setting or medium or large gathering, drum dancing was very much part of their livelihood. So this is where I picked it up from my parents and also from my fellow Ahiamute. After surviving the harsh winters of the Arctic, in the springtime or when the weather gets good, by word of mouth, they are planning to have a big feast, a day, 2 days, 3 days, perhaps in durations. And every night they drum dance. It's not just drum dance. They just survived maybe starvation or a cold winter or some hardships in general. When they feast, when they drum dance, they feel much better. They are stronger, ready to go back to their camp and ready to face tomorrow with a bit more energy to carry them on with their family. So I like to share a drumming with you. So here it is. Thank you very much. Matna.
Thank you very much. We are also honored to be joined by Elder Verna de Montigny. Elder de Montigny is Métis from Lee Koyen, the corner, near Binscrot, Manitoba. She has made outstanding contributions to the preservation of Michif language and culture. She has worked on developing Michif language programs in Michif elders and has delivered Michif programs in various Manitoba communities. She has also worked for Manitoba Métis Federation, Southwest Regional Officer, and for many years. Elder Montigny, over to you.
Tanchikiwo amateka kioteka ek kuteka ishatushke ek amate. Bomate. E honor dayan. Akiwi kumiek nishta otachiwichiwe yan anosh. Maka note sketen the Algonquin territory. Feminal en kikashkita kikliv Claudette. Fi David Marcinetawak. Wishtawa kipe mahachik kota mate. I want to thank the Creator for giving us a beautiful day and blessing us with one. I want to humbly ask Him to give us strength today to guide us in the implementation of the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People from all over. I'm going to ask Him to give us a successful meeting. I would also like to ask Him for a blessing for all the elders in our land, the youth, our leaders, our families. I'm going to ask us to bless us with good health as we go on along our daily lives, especially for us to show each other respect and honor in all things that we do and see and all things that we touch, and especially to show compassion and kindness to each other. And I'm going to say, pray in my language. The Boju, Kichimanito, and Belgian Kimina and Nosh Chiwapatamak. Kegagwachmatina Mudes Boju, Kichimanito, Chishoki Yakanosh, Nadwe, Chishokitayan, Pichipskemiak, Pichmiak direction, Umaga Ustayapatanos, the Declaration de Nationalité, Oste Nodwe, Porque de Modernigine. Kikagwachmatin Boju, Chimiak, and Assembly Chimiaik. Mina Kchimanato, Kagwachkaman Kakeli view Kakshita with the Kayachik. Look at me, Legion, Nashafinan, Beni Kchimanato. Kchimanato Mina, the Bosati Kakilminan, Chijaki Tuyak, Kichimaya Shoyak, Himina, Chishagi Tuyak, Talisho. Kichamaneto, Kikwetchimetin respect, the honor, Kakiochimiachik limon. Anosh de me del tolta, Akshitmanto. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. So at this point, I will give the floor to Minister Lametti. Minister Lametti. C'est à vous.
My gratitude to Elder Claudette. My gratitude to Elder Claudette Megwich, to Elder David Nickermick, and to Elder Verna. Merci. Your words help to ground us and help us get started in a good way, not only for this press conference, but for the implementation of the Declaration itself. I too want to acknowledge that we're gathered here today on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. This is an important day, and I want to start by acknowledging the people who are with us and whose presence is important to note, both physically and virtually. First of all, my cabinet colleague, Carolyn Bennett, the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, who is here with us virtually. I'm pleased to be joined in here in person by Perry Bellegarde, National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, and Natan Obed, President of Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami, and virtually by David Chartrand, National Spokesperson for the Métis National Council and President of the Manitoba Métis Federation. I look forward to hearing all of your remarks. I want to offer also my thanks to Chief Wilton Littlechild for joining us this morning and who will share some words with us shortly. I also note the virtual presence of my former colleague and MP, Romeo Saganash from UNDRIP, and the former MP from that region, and I will have more to say about Romeo shortly as well. I'd also like to acknowledge Gary Ananda Sangri, Parliamentary Secretary to Minister Bennett, and Jaime Batiste, the Member of Parliament for Sydney, Victoria, who has, I would say, a genetic connection to the Declaration. Many of you know Jaime's father, Professor Sakai Henderson, was one of the first Indigenous graduates of the Harvard Law School and currently head of the Native Law Center in Saskatchewan, and was one of the people that also helped draft the declaration. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here. Merci, Miigwech. Il y a plus de 4 ans, en 2016, le ministre Bennett annonçait que notre gouvernement avait endossé la Déclaration des Nations unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones sans réserve et que nous nous engagions à la mettre en œuvre pleinement et efficacement. L'année dernière, après que le projet de loi d'initiative C-262 de Romeo Saganash n'ait pas franchi l'étape du Sénat, nous avons promis d'utiliser comme base pour proposer une législation gouvernementale implémentant la déclaration. Et nous nous sommes fixés une limite de temps précise, le faire avant la fin de l'année 2020. Aujourd'hui, je suis fier de dire que nous avons respecté notre engagement. Plus tôt ce matin, j'ai déposé à la Chambre des communes le projet de loi C-15, la loi concernant la Déclaration des Nations unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples reflects a decade of work by Indigenous leaders around the globe. Its importance as a guiding framework should not be underestimated. I am honored today to be joined by Indigenous leaders who can reflect in their own words on the meaning and the importance of this document and the rights it affirms. Working with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples to implement the Declaration and create a framework to achieve its objectives is a statement that the Government of Canada values, respects, and promotes the human rights of all, and not just some. The legislation is a significant step forward on the shared path to reconciliation for Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples alike. It has the potential to be transformational. Comme je l'ai mentionné plus tôt, cette législation est bâtie sur le travail fondamental accompli par Romeo Saganash et son ancien projet de loi C-262. Nous sommes reconnaissants à M. Saganash pour son incroyable travail et son dévouement envers la mise en œuvre de la déclaration, ainsi que pour son importante contribution lors du développement de cette législation. Donc, je voudrais le remercier et reconnaître sa présence parmi nous aujourd'hui. Chinskumatan Romeo. Using his bill as a basis for the new legislation, over the last several months, we engaged with representatives from the Assembly of First Nations, from Inuit, Tapiriit, Kanatami, and the Métis National Council. I want to thank all of the leaders present and virtual for their work, the work of their teams in helping us get to this place today. Merci. We received valuable input from Indigenous organizations and right holders, organizations representing Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, and LGBTQ2 people, and Indigenous youth, listening to each other to make sure that we get this right. I sincerely thank all of you for your input and your efforts. We also reached out to industry, provinces, and territories to understand their perspectives and receive their input as active contributors to reconciliation in Canada. As Minister Freeland noted the other night in her economic statement, British Columbia deserves special mention for having led the way. And so I would like to thank in particular Scott Fraser and David Eby, the ministers then in charge, and look forward to continuing to work with British Columbia. They've shown us the way to move forward. I want to thank everyone who participated in the dialogue that brought us here today and will continue to move us forward, and all those who shared their thoughts, their expertise, and their experiences during the development of the bill. The proposed legislation today reflects your contribution and insights. But we are not done. This is a dialogue that continues and will need to continue in order for us to continue to not only implement the framework, but create a better Canada. I want to thank my team, a number of whom are here present today, as well as members of the Department of Justice, my Deputy Minister, as well as Laurie Sargent in the department for all the work that they have done. This framework will put into place new requirements for the government to work in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous peoples, to align federal laws with the human rights standards set out in the Declaration, to develop an action plan to help achieve the objectives of the Declaration, and to report annually on our progress to Parliament. Ces étapes, franchies en partenariat avec les peuples autochtones, engendreront plus de prévisibilité, de clarté et de prospérité pour les peuples autochtones et non autochtones de tout le pays. C'est une partie essentielle de la construction d'un meilleur Canada pour tous, pas seulement aujourd'hui, mais pour les générations qui nous suivront. I believe that implementing the Declaration offers hope for a stronger, more equitable future for Indigenous peoples. I hope and expect that this critical legislation will receive strong support to move through the parliamentary process with the urgency it deserves. Finally, it's a great pleasure and indeed it's an honor to invite Chief Wilton Littlechild to say a few words. Chief Littlechild is, I think, a critical part of this whole process. A residential school survivor, a great athlete, a former member of Parliament, a commissioner on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and one of the drafters of the Declaration at the United Nations. Indeed, he has a room named after him in New York. Thank you for being with us, Chief Littlechild. Kanaskomatan, and I turn the floor over to you.
Do we hear you, Chief Littlechild? We're having difficulty hearing you, Chief Littlechild. Is there anything else we can do? We see you on screen. You can begin anytime. You may be on mute. Unfortunately, we can't hear Chief Littlechild at the moment. Is there anything else we can do? We see you on screen, however. We're having some technical difficulties with Mr. Littlechild, Chief Littlechild's feed. Hopefully we'll be able to get this corrected as soon as possible. The information I have, Chief Littlechild, that you would be muted. If it's possible to unmute yourself, I think we will be able to hear you here in the room. Sound check, Chief Littlechild, can you hear us? Can you do a signal to show that you hear us? So you okay. It looks like Chief Littlechild might be having difficulties. If it's okay, maybe we could go to the next speaker and we'll insert him, I think. Would that be okay? Yes? Okay. So next on the roster, and hopefully we'll get Chief Littlechild back online, I'd like to give the floor to Minister Bennett, please.
Koi koi, ulakut, tansi, good morning, bonjour. Je vous parle aujourd'hui depuis le territoire traditionnel de la Première Nation des Mississaugas of the Credit, où nous honorons tous les peuples autochtones qui ont pagaillé sur ces eaux et dont les mocassins ont parcouru ces terres. Thank you to Elders Claudette Commanda and David Chartrand and Vernon de Montigny for starting us today in a good way and making sure that the ancestors are here with us. I want to also thank National Chief Bellegarde and President Obed and National Spokesperson Chartrand for your leadership and for joining us today, and your work alongside the work of the modern treaty and self-governing nations has helped us get to this point. And I do want to thank Grand Chief Abel Bossum and Chief Donna Tizia Tram for their inspiring words in our discussions at the FPTI meeting. Many people have worked on the declaration over the years, and I, like Minister Lametti, want to particularly recognize the hard work and the significant role that Indigenous leaders from Canada, like Chief Littlechild and Sactus Youngblood Henderson, have played in the development of the declaration itself over a 25-year period. We are so grateful to the work of Romeo Saganash in helping us to get to this date. His private member's bill from the last Parliament, which passed in the House of Commons, was so important in establishing the base and stimulating the necessary and important conversations. We welcome him with us here today, along with Grand Chief Littlechild, Parliamentary Secretary Ananda Sangri, and MP Jaime Batiste, treaty educator, and the son of Sactus Henderson. As Minister Lametti has acknowledged, this has been a whole-of-government effort. We are also really grateful to the Prime Minister, Ministers O'Regan, LeBlanc, Miller, and all the ministers and MPs who have taken on the challenge of the rights of Indigenous peoples as a priority. The inclusion of Section 35 into the Constitution Act in 1982 was historic. Since that time, the jurisprudence has been clear. Way too much time and money has been spent by governments and industry to lose in court. Indigenous peoples now have a full box of rights. Sadly, despite robust constitutional and legal protections, Indigenous rights continue to be misunderstood. The progress has been too slow, and the impacts of denying rights has had serious consequences. Systemic racism and overt discrimination have resulted in unacceptable gaps in health, social, and economic outcomes. This bill is about breathing life into Section 35 of our Constitution. It formally entrenches the rights of Indigenous peoples in Canadian law. We have a responsibility as a country to ensure that Indigenous rights are affirmed, but that they are fully understood and respected. Bill C-15 responds to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's Call to Action 43 and also responds to the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Implementing the declaration should not be scary. It provides Canada with a roadmap to truly legislate the honor of the Crown. Already, there are 9 federal laws that refer to and were drafted in the spirit of the declaration. Laws respecting Indigenous languages, Indigenous child and family services, and Indigenous participation in environmental impact assessments. But we know there is much more work to do. In November 2010, Canada endorsed the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In the last Parliament, there was a robust process after which Bill 262 passed in the House of Commons. In this Parliament, there has been meaningful engagement with Indigenous peoples, industry, and legislators, which has resulted in important improvements to the bill. I too want to thank our team, Deputy Minister Daniel Watson and ADM Ross Paty and their teams for all their hard work getting us to this day. Minister Lametti and I were truly inspired by the session with Indigenous youth leaders and law students. They were clear, as were others, including Two-Spirit and gender-diverse peoples, that respecting and acknowledging diversity and gender diversity is essential to achieving the full and fair implementation of the UN Declaration. Tragic events over the last months have underscored the persistence and harm of racism and systemic discrimination and barriers that Indigenous peoples face on a daily basis. Ce dont nous avons besoin est d'un changement fondamental. Il s'agit de respecter les droits autochtones et de valoriser la diversité. Il s'agit de réparer les fautes historiques. Il s'agit de se débarrasser de ce qui appartient à notre passé colonialiste. Il s'agit d'écrire notre prochain chapitre ensemble en tant que partenaires avec tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes. Miigwech, Nakamik, merci, thank you, merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. I'd like to give la parole to National Chief Bellegarde.
Very much. Nista nenaskamun kakiat no temtik no akomagnak. Nista kanaskom tenoa kakiao kiteyak. Anots kiskau anotainans manatu kanaskumtin algonquins kanaskum tenoa. Nista a little bit in Cree, friends and relatives. I'm very happy to be here, acknowledging you all and thanking the elders for their prayer and acknowledge the Creator for this beautiful day. And I want to begin by thanking the elders, Claudette and David and Verna, for starting us off in a good way. I also want to acknowledge the leadership of Minister Lametti for his strong leadership on this file. I acknowledge as well the other ministers that are with us. Carolyn Bennett is online, and thank her for her words. Parliamentary Secretary Gary Anasangari, Member of Parliament Jaime Batiste, and all the others, the staff, the team that have done so much. My colleagues and leaders, President Natan Obed, and national spokesperson as well for the Métis, David Chartrand as well on the line. This is a very important day for First Nations people, Métis people, and Inuit peoples. On behalf of the Assembly of First Nations, I want to acknowledge all the hard work that went into tabling of this new bill, Bill C-15. And I will lift up the Government of Canada for the work they've done, for doing something that they said they would get done before the end of this year, and that's a tabling of this bill. There was a commitment made that a federal government bill to introduce and recognize the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples before the end of 2020 has been done. And while we know the process has not been ideal, and there's a lot of First Nations across Canada that aren't totally satisfied with the process because there's a diversity of opinion amongst First Nations people. Our Assembly of First Nations had the mandate from Chiefs in Assembly to proceed to work with the government to get a bill that is as strong as Bill C-262, the private members bill that was introduced by Romeo Saganash. The Assembly of First Nations has long championed the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And we view that the Declaration is an essential foundation for protecting and realizing the inherent rights and title of First Nations and for building a better relationship with Canada. And so our AFN mandated a team, and it was led by Dr. Willie Littlechild. Chief Willie Littlechild was the chair of our legal team. And he was assisted by Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafon, Paul Joff, Wendy Moss, Caleb Ben. We had a strong team to work with the government's team, working in partnership to come up with a bill that's as strong as and or better than C-262. I thank them for that. Chief Willie, hopefully we'll be able to hear from him. Strong leader that has been working on this for over 40 years. I also want to say that this United Nations Declaration bill doesn't give us anything new. but it recognizes, it acknowledges, and affirms our rights under international law. And our Assembly of First Nations has called for adoption of federal implementation legislation to ensure that we can move forward in a collaborative, coordinated way to put the United Nations Declaration into practice. So in the days and weeks ahead, First Nations chiefs will be looking very closely at this bill. The implementation of the Declaration is very important to all our people, and we want to make sure that the implementation legislation adopted by Parliament will be as strong as possible. And I will say that whenever we look at Bill C-15, it's clear that it contains elements that our chiefs have mandated our AFN to work towards. The bill condemns the racist and colonial doctrines and beliefs that have led to grave human rights abuses like the residential school system. The bill sets out a framework for First Nations and the federal government to work collaboratively to develop a national action plan to advance implementation. The bill recognizes the reality that Canadian courts and tribunals are already using the UN Declaration to interpret Canadian law. The bill calls for a proactive and collaborative process to review federal laws to ensure they align with the Declaration before they end up in court. The bill would also require regular reporting to Parliament on the progress we make together. So this will promote accountability for ongoing implementation in the years to come. Many people will recognize that these were key elements that were found in Bill C-262, Romeo Saganash's private member's bill. So to Romeo that's watching and listening, thank you so much, Romeo, for your leadership in the past, for laying the foundation on which we can build a better country together. I lift you up and say, Kananaskom tin no chagan, for your strong leadership. Bill C-262 was passed in the House of Commons in 2018, but it was only to die on the order paper in the Senate due to the stalling in the Senate. We don't want that to happen again. Canada cannot afford to have that happen again. This UN Declaration sets out the minimum human rights standards that are well established in international law. And these minimum standards are essential to closing the gap in the quality of life and access to basic services facing First Nations today. These minimum standards are essential to healing the wounds of injustice and systemic racism. Systemic racism requires systemic solutions, and that's what the United Nations Declaration provides. Implementation of the Declaration will benefit all Canadians. The Declaration will promote sustainable development in which Indigenous peoples are full partners. This is a necessary foundation for a just and prosperous Canada. It will create economic stability and economic certainty. And we have to face the fact that the status quo is not working. Forcing First Nations to go to court to protect our rights imposes a high cost on everyone. So we need a better alternative. Implementation of the United Nations Declaration provides that alternative. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission included that the Declaration is the framework for reconciliation. Both the TRC and the inquiry, the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, called for the full implementation of the Declaration. This implementation legislation will not change Canadian laws and policies overnight, but it will establish a framework for moving ahead in a collaborative, coordinated, and consistent way. So at this point in 2020, we know it's long overdue. So looking at the Bill C-15, we always say, it's not perfect, it's introduced for first reading. There's one concern I have about the bill, that it gives too long a deadline for creating an action plan. We've waited too long already. We don't want to wait for another 3 years. And before the bill is adopted into law, we also want clarity on which government department will take the lead on this crucial initiative. And because it's so important, we would like to see a commitment to a periodic review, which is something any good legislation should include. There are a lot of steps between now and when this bill will receive royal assent. No question, this is a good first step. It's introduced for first reading. But as I've said before on Bill C-91 and Bill C-92, after they were both introduced for first reading, we cannot and should not rest until we all hear those words. Royal assent. Eguse, thank you for your leadership, Minister.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm happy to let you know that we have Chief Littlechild back. He will go at the end after National Spokesperson Chartrand. So over to you, Obed, Mr. Obed.
Nakumik, thank you. I want to acknowledge Elder Commanda, Elder Sirkwak, and Elder de Montigny. Thank you for your opening words. Also want to acknowledge and recognize National Chief Bellegarde and National Spokesperson Chartrand and other Indigenous leadership that are here with us and online virtually. I want to thank Minister Lametti for your work over the course of this pandemic to put this also at the forefront of your mind as well. And then your cabinet colleagues and Minister Bennett, who has been tireless in working towards this day as well over the past 5 years, and other ministers in the last 5 years who have tried to shepherd this legislation through. I also want to recognize as well Romeo Saganash and also Wilton Littlechild, two leaders who have worked in the trenches on this for a long time, and it's great to see this particular day, and let's hope that we can all work towards its completion to royal assent, as National Chief Bellegarde has previously mentioned. This is a significant point in Canadian history as we mark the introduction to this particular bill and act respecting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The UN Declaration itself filled a gap that previously existed in the international human rights regime. It's intended to promote and protect the distinct status and the rights of Inuit, as well as all other Indigenous peoples globally. In Canada, and with this bill, the Government of Canada is finally recognizing the interrelated, interdependent, and indivisible rights affirmed by the UN Declaration as universal and with application in Canadian law. This is an important step toward ending discrimination against Indigenous peoples through the recognition of our distinct status and rights, as well as their universal application. It marks a positive departure from the past position of segregating our human rights into an imagined separate underclass of rights. Just consider that federal, provincial, and territorial governments have all passed human rights legislation affirming the human rights of individual Canadians, and that provide recourse and remedy through human rights tribunals and commissions for individuals whose rights have been violated. That has not existed, or it has not existed in the fullest nature possible for Indigenous peoples' rights in this country. Notably, this bill creates the obligation for the federal government to develop and implement an action plan in partnership with Inuit, First Nations, and Métis. ITK believes that the monitoring and enforcement mechanisms needed to prevent and end human rights violations against Inuit, First Nations, and Métis can be achieved through the bill's commitment to include monitoring and enforcement mechanisms as an element and feature of the action plan. Significant work is now required to ensure that the bill advances through the legislative process and achieves royal assent as quickly as possible. ITK strongly encourages all members of Parliament to support the bill in order to help advance the urgent work in implementing the UN Declaration here in this country. I would also like for Canadians to approach this with an open and objective mind, rather than to approach it through a lens that some of the critics of this bill have tried to push This is an important time in this country in reconciliation, and this is an important measure and step in achieving that ultimate goal. And I look forward to working with you, Minister Lametti, and with all Canadians in seeing this through to completion. Nakomik.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. On va passer la parole à National Spokesperson Chartrand, and then we'll go to Chief Littlechild. Monsieur Chartrand.
I hope you can all hear me. Let me start off, of course, by acknowledging the elders under prayers. Claudette, a very good friend of mine, Verna, and David, I thank you very much for sending a strong message and the kind words you echoed on behalf of our culture. All of our cultures are interconnected. I want to say something before I move on to another comment. I was thinking as the elders were praying, we just saw an example of all the different languages and instruments. They all find a way to speak to the Creator and all reach the same pathway. And the United Declarations itself is kind of a message that we can all connect as Canadians and recognize each other's differences and at the same time, however, respect each other's pathways. And the elders showed that by all different languages and instruments, but still all leading to the same place. And that's what I think the UN Declaration is all about. I also want to take the opportunity, of course, to thank the Prime Minister for his vision and his position on nation to nation, government to government. And it's so important that that's being recognized. And Mr. Lametti, thank you for the work, and Minister Bennett and Mr. Miller, who's not here, but thank him also. And the bureaucracy, Daniel, and the rest of the team that are there. But I personally want to thank my friends, of course, Bellegarde, a very good friend of mine, and one that has led this, championing this issue for so long. And of course, Obed, my very good dear friend. And Willie, of course, it was great to see you, and you're always out there. I've seen him so many different times in different places, and he's led this. And along with my president, Clement Chartier, who worked at the UN closely. But let me say how proud I am today. My heart is smiling, and I have hope and pride just bursting. If you can see it, you'd see a glow shining from me right now. Well, because we will make history today, all of us. I'm sure our ancestors are smiling upon us, and they share this monumental change as Canadians come together to continue building. And let's not forget this very young country. We're a very young country, and we're building it together, and this is one example of how we move forward. I am proud for all Indigenous nations in Canada, for their strength and resilience for centuries to closely guard their determination and sovereignty. I thank Romeo, and look behind his wall. Resilience. It's on his wall right behind his head there. Resilience. And that's what we are as Indigenous people. We're resilient. We'll never give up. It will never go away. So I think that I want to express that loud and clear. Thank you again, Romeo, for the work you have done. I'm proud to represent the Métis Nation and our Métis leaders that are probably watching at home. Are also all our fellow Indigenous leaders and from chiefs right across this country and to all the Inuit leaders who work so hard to try to make a change in their communities. The skill in drafting this, of course, took a long time. In 2007, the declaration was adopted at the General Assembly, and it's 13 years later, we're finally bringing it into our house, and I'm very, very proud of that. We are actually standing on the shoulders of giants that put this together. This is an exciting day for all of Canada. The introduction of this bill represents an important step in moving forward and a better future for all of us in Canada, one that recognizes and respects the human rights of Indigenous people. The UN Declaration is a blueprint for clarity in this process. It sets out the minimum standards for our survival, well-being, and dignity. But by putting our self-determination at the center of our interactions with government and industry, it provides a framework for stable and respectful partnerships. The domestic legislation will show the world that Canada has developed a solid foundation for investments in responsible resource development, green technology, and bring all sectors together to be an example for the world to see. The Métis Nation has shown that with good faith and effective leadership, respect for Indigenous rights is a pathway to opportunity. We hold up the productive relationships that we have developed with our industry partners as proof of this. I reject any suggestion that this bill or the UN Declaration itself will lead to stagnation or uncertainty. Respecting our self-determination as affirmed in the UN Declaration means that the government and industries will work in partnership with us. It means that the Indigenous peoples must be involved in a meaningful way in a decision-making process that shape policies or projects and that ultimately determine their viability. This approach fosters unity, healthy relationships, certainty, and stability for Indigenous nations, but industry and Canadians and all of our country. We need this approach to effectively respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, to build back from the losses we have suffered in this crisis, and to guard against the possibility of future pandemics. We have learned through experiences thus far that supporting our Métis Nation governments to respond to the needs of our people is the best way forward. The Métis Nation is a partner confederation. In 1870, Louis Riel and the Métis Provisional Government negotiated the entry of Manitoba into Confederation. This was an exercise of nationhood and self-government and a clear example of our self-determination benefits of Canada. Unfortunately, at the time throughout history, the Canadian state has perceived the exercise of our human rights as a threat. They have tried time and time again to break apart our nation. This legislation is a pathway to restoring our place within Canada. We see the UN Declaration as the foundation for a new relationship between Canada and the Indigenous people, because it puts our self-determination at the heart of our interactions with the Government of Canada and the provincial governments. This supports our government-to-government, nation-to-nation relationship, as echoed by our Prime Minister. This will be embraced under a Canada-Métis Nation Accord entered into 2017. The Métis Nation helped build this country, and we fully intend to continue help building it forward. So again, thank you to every one of you that participates in this, and all those that worked on the process at home, to the world that got involved in declaring this declaration, and to you, Bennett, for being there to say that echo these statements of Canada's position. And Lametti, I personally thank you for pushing it through the channels, and now that you can bring it as the first reading, as pointed out by my good friend Perry, and I can't wait for the word royal assent myself. So again, thank all those that have been involved, and to you all the Indigenous friends and leaders, thank you for the hard work you have done to make this real. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. And now we will be hearing from Chief Littlechild. Welcome back. Oh, we're good? Yes? Chief Littlechild, can you hear us?
Do you want to just start speaking?
Yes, we're waiting to hear from Chief Littlechild.
Nigan, semanto minaska maanos, iko kestengoyak, anoskagiskak. First, I give gratitude and praise to the Creator, the Great Spirit, for bestowing on all of us today such wonderful blessings. May kanmo teo, ego hausaugi helnia, makwachis ikoche. My Cree name is Walking Wolf, and my chief's name is Golden Eagle from Musqueam Treaty 6 territory. Thank you, as always, to our elders for your spiritual guidance, and to all our families, in particular on this very special day on these traditional territories of the Algonquin. Honorable Ministers Lametti and Dr. Bennett, National Chief Bellegarde, Presidents Chartrand and Natan, Obed, and other dignitaries, members of Parliament, and of course, Romeo Saganash. Thank you. We gather here today in memory of all those that worked very hard on the UN Declaration, but were called on their spirit journey so we could all reap the benefits of their sacrifices, and there were many. It's always hard to find the right words to lift the hearts and minds of everyone impacted by a momentous occasion like today. But I chose it to be a cause for a celebration of life. Yes, we heard a lot during the hearings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We heard what was said during the apology, that there was a lot of harm that was done to children. But today we turn a corner 10 years ago, we started charting a federal implementation act at Maskwacis. Now Canada must activate its principles, number 1 and 5. The tabling today of the legislation to implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is so very important. While our leaders could not enter the League of Nations in 1923, while we were left out in 1948 when the Universal Declaration on Human Rights was adopted, while a hunger strike had to be held during the negotiations, while many were turned away because visas were rejected, we had no voice in the international arena. It kind of reminds me now just what happened this morning, back in 1977 when we couldn't speak at the UN. But now we will have equal rights. That's why we needed a declaration. We say goodbye to grandfather son and say hello to baby son and a new era. Because of bold decisions made by Ministers Lametti and Dr. Bennett and others, while some Indigenous peoples, tribes, and nations do not want domestication of their treaties, international agreements, some want an end to systemic racism, ongoing violence against our members, an end to corporate violence, child apprehension, incarceration, and the list goes on. This bill, C-15, offers us the opportunity to substantially improve the situation. We are now on a path of true reconciliation, healing, peace, and justice. But we have to do our share. We need to build on the strengths of our people, to lift each other up, open to it, bring and welcome home our children, return to our spiritual and culture, our creativity and diversity as the embedded answers so we can once again be strong, brave, and true. The proposed bill is much stronger and enhanced than previous attempts, but it can be better, and we need to work harder together to improve it. We never said the declaration was perfect, but if you have better solutions, please share them. Let's restore respectful relationships together. Let's find that sacred and ethical space for consensus. After all, it's about our survival, dignity, and being well. Let's leave a hopeful future for our children and families. They have a right to be happy and healthy. So yes, there's more work to do, but it's up to us. We have a chance to be number one in the world. It's about balance and implementation, which, by the way, must be in the title. Balance and implementation must be our collective and positive goal. And I believe this legislation is our roadmap to reconciliation. As former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon stated, Willie, just don't let them leave Indigenous peoples behind. Don't let them leave Indigenous peoples behind. This bill advances reconciliation. So with its importance, we won't let it happen. Thank you very much. Hai, merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. At this juncture, I will leave it to the operator to line up questions from the media. We'll go a few questions on the phone and then after here to the floor. On va passer aux questions médiatiques maintenant. Je vais donner la parole à l'opérateur. On va avoir des questions au téléphone en premier. Après ça, on ira ici au plancher. Merci. Operator.
Thank you, merci. Please press star 1 at this time. If you have a question, s'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. The first question is from Christy Kirkup from the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. My first question is just respectfully with regards to the timing of the tabling of this legislation. I know that immediately after the last election, the Prime Minister had indicated that the government was going to get to work on this legislation, and I'm just wondering why it took as long as it did, and if you can please address any fears that this legislation may not see royal assent if there's a federal election come springtime.
Thank you for that question. We made a commitment when C-262 got, frankly, upheld in the Senate for political gamesmanship. We made a commitment that we would turn this into a government bill, and we made a commitment that we would table it before the end of 2020. We have met both of those commitments. We have worked hard throughout the past year since I was reappointed minister in the fall of 2019. Worked through 2020 with a number of the people who I'm up here today with and who are online virtually, and our teams, in order to use C-262 as a base and try to improve it where we could, but all along with an eye to making sure we had something that we could table before the end of the calendar year. I think we've done that. I think it's a testament to our hard work. And there have been some factors that have, some roadblocks that have gone up there. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and that created a number of different challenges in terms of the legislative process and the consultative process. So I'm really pleased to be here, notwithstanding everything that we have faced. It's a testament to collaboration.
And just as a follow-up, I'd like to ask about the time limit with regards to the action plan. I know specifically in the legislation it talks about an action plan that must be completed essentially as soon as possible, and quote, no later than 3 years after the day on which this section comes into force. Is there any flexibility on the government's part to that language around the timeline for the action plan?
Well, we think it's a reasonable time limit. It is something that we have to develop collaboratively, and therefore it will take time. We have to work. We have to work with Indigenous leadership in order to make sure that we can put that action plan in place. There are obviously other institutions in Canada, including the provinces and industry stakeholders who will want input into that action plan. So we will work collaboratively in order to get that done. We're serious about it. We think 3 years is a reasonable time frame.
Thank you, merci. The next question is from Brett Forrester from APTN News. Please go ahead.
Hello, thanks for taking my questions today. Just to build on that last point a little bit, Conservative leader Erin O'Toole has expressed some trepidation over certain elements of UNDRIP, and as pointed out, Bill C-262 died in the Senate. Can you address some of the opposition you expect this bill might face moving forward through the legislative process?
Well, I'd rather not speculate on opposition in the sense that we think the bill is a good bill. We hope it's about human rights. You know, how can you be against the recognition and the assertion of inherent human rights? And so we think this bill will have wide support in Parliament and in the Senate. As a government bill, we will be able to better manage the process. There are a lot of fears being raised about it, and National Chief Bellegarde raised it, National Spokesperson Chartrand and National President Obed also raised some of these fears, and we think they're misplaced. I could certainly let my colleagues speak to that as well, but we're looking for certainty. We're looking for certainty in our relationships, the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. We're looking at rights being affirmed. We're looking at partnership and a framework to basically encapsulate that process. all of those things, I think, will help create a better Canada. And so I'm not, I guess I'm somewhat concerned that there are these rumors out there that frankly aren't true. But we'll work to dispel them.
I can just as well a comment, I think, to urge all parties to support this piece of legislation. It's introduced for first reading, and there's always ways to make things better through the parliamentary legislative drafting process. Second reading, then to committee, and there's going to be lots of presentations made to how to make this better. But I would urge all parties to support it because I've said this before, that it creates economic stability and economic certainty. When you involve and include the rights and title holders in all major projects, you always find the balance between the environment and the economy. And I would urge that this bill, yeah, it's introduced for first reading today, but it has a precarious journey to go through until we hear royal assent. And so to make recommendations, make it stronger, make it better, but to have it pass, because we are talking about fundamental human rights. We're talking about recognizing things that exist already in international law, and it's really about creating a better Canada together, a better country, and there's nothing to fear. And if people have questions and fears about it, well, let's sit down and talk. Let's learn from each other. Do that education awareness that leads to understanding, that will lead to action, because there's nothing to be feared about with this UN declaration. It really is about building a better country, and that's what this bill does.
Thank you. And as my follow-up, I'm wondering if it's possible if I could ask Mr. Saganash to see how he's feeling to see this bill get tabled.
TK, just for the continuation of the answering from the last question, the original question before Romeo Saganash gets a chance to weigh in, and I think David Chartrand also wished to comment. 2020 has been a pretty incredible year when it comes to the recognition of systemic racism in this country for a number of groups of people. And I think there's been the beginning of a reckoning for the country when it comes to how we structure our institutions, how we respect one another, and throwing away the biases or the racism that we carry sometimes through our lives without even knowing it. This UN declaration legislation has, over the past 15 years, stirred up some of those same sentiments that have those same underlying tinges of racism against First Nations, Inuit, and Métis in this country. But as has already been said, this bill is a very simple bill in that it takes an international human rights instrument and attempts to try to meaningfully implement that instrument in Canada. We have done the same with many other international instruments, and so this bill should be seen through the lens of human rights legislation that conforms to international law, rather than the end of the world, if you will, from the business community towards certainty, or for other places within this country and other particular areas where this bill will change the way business is conducted. And that is a good thing. I will say that from my perspective, the fear may be well placed if you're worried about the status quo. But if you're not worried about keeping the status quo and you want to see positive change in this country, then this is an exciting day.
the question from APTN, I think it's a very good question, and let me express this. It's very clear from our perspective, this particular bill and this UN declaration has been used as the boogeyman to industry and jobs. And now that industry is getting a better perspective of it, they're seeing now it's not as bad as they think it was or portrayed to be as bad as it is. This is not going to take jobs. It's not going to take away industry. It's not going to affect business in a negative way. In fact, it's going to increase the opportunity of clarity between our governments to sit down with industry. When a mining operation comes into play, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes 10 years, 15 years of all the investors and those that buy stocks into those businesses to come and develop this particular mine in a certain area of natural resource. So now it's very clear how we go about doing it together. And we, of course, will always work towards environment and employment. So I think when you look at it from that context, there's less fear now from industry. We spoke to the mining community, we speak to industry from oil and gas, and you look across the nation. So the fear that was being portrayed as being the boogeyman is falling apart. Whoever was trying to use that as a political tool, now they have very little short grass to hide in because it's not real. And I think industries are really coming on board and already they're sending the message that they're supporting this bill. And I think from that perspective, for those that should try to use it as a boogeyman, should be quite ashamed of themselves because this pointed out by Lametti, this is about human rights, it's about dignity, it's about partnership, and how do we build this young country we all love and all want to share in the benefits at the same time protecting its Mother Earth and its environment. So I think the boogeyman approach is coming to an end, and I think we're all going to be working together for a better Canada and a better opportunity for industry and Indigenous governments.
We're going to go to the next question. Mr. Saganash is having we're having some other technical difficulties, so we'll go to the next question. Maybe we'll take a question here on the floor and then go to the phone lines. Is there any questions here on the floor? One more on the phone line I'm asked to, so we'll go to the phone line for one more question.
Thank you, merci. The next question is from Maura Forrest from Politico. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I think one of the questions I wanted to ask was, and this I suppose is a question for the ministers, though anyone there could answer it. I wonder if you can give an example of a piece of existing legislation that might need to be reviewed or reopened specifically to align with the UN Declaration.
Let me actually do the opposite and give you a piece of existing legislation or two pieces of that were already drafted with the UN Declaration in mind. So as an example of how to move forward. So in the previous Parliament, Bill C-91 on Indigenous languages and Bill C-92 on Indigenous child welfare were both drafted, and there was a great deal of collaboration with respect to the way those bills were brought forward, a great deal of dialogue with Indigenous leadership, and the wording chosen in each was affirmative, recognizing inherent rights, and affirmative of not just the rights but of the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. Another example is the Resource Development Bill, old Bill C-69, which it really integrated, I think, a very positive role for Indigenous nations in the development, conception and development of projects, such projects. I mean, we're at a place, because of the declaration, and because I think, as my colleagues have spoken of the collaboration, the certainty with respect to, for example, resource development projects, where even an institution such as the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers has publicly endorsed the declaration. Again, the potential for certainty and collaboration is a benefit for everybody, in addition to serving human rights.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, I think you've touched on this a little bit, but specifically the point in the UN Declaration about free, prior, and informed consent did seem to be at the center of a lot of the pushback the last time around with Bill C-262. A few of you have talked about industry being more on board. Do you expect then that that will not be a point of controversy this time around, or do you expect there still to be questions around the definition specifically of free, prior, and informed consent?
Again, I'll weigh in initially, but I'm happy if any of my colleagues around the table this morning would like to weigh in. Again, UNDRIP is about rights. It's about human rights, and it's about a framework for implementing those rights, and meaningful consultation is what is embodied in free, prior, and informed consent. It is about establishing a profound and fundamental dialogue with Indigenous nations generally, or a particular Indigenous nation with respect, let's say, to a resource development project. The word veto does not exist in the document. As I've said, CAP has publicly endorsed the declaration. British Columbia, which has demonstrated a great deal of leadership on the declaration with its own implementing legislation at the provincial level, has also been quite clear on this, and I think it's fair to say that British Columbia has one of the strongest economies in Canada, with probably a model for partnership with Indigenous peoples. So I think those fears are misplaced. We're going to obviously meet, I think, the misinformation or the fear to the extent that it might be held legitimately with information, with facts, and with a positive attitude and framework moving forward.
In addition, to make some comments on free, prior, informed consent, it's all about involving the rights and title holders sooner than later. And it's about the right to say yes, or the right to say no, or the right to say yes with conditions. But again, to stress the fact that you need to involve the rights and title holders sooner than later, from start to finish, on any project. And it's all about involvement and the inclusion and the partnership. And again, to stress that this is really about creating certainty. It's about creating stability, creating the environments that will be right, because people will know what are the rules and conditions for investment. How do you involve the rights and title holders? And there will be key strategic partnerships made. So this is really, it just makes sense. And the fear-mongering that's out there about this is, again, sit down to talk, sit down and listen, and we can work through those fears, because this is really in the best interests of not only First Nations people, Indigenous peoples, it's in the best interest of Canada. And that's what this bill means. It's creating that space for full involvement, the inclusion of the rights and title holders. And that will create the environment that will create certainty. That's what this means. And as we've said before, anywhere in the declaration, there, veto, as everybody is saying, is this veto there? It's about the involvement, the inclusion. And that's the right to say yes, the right to say no, or the right to say yes with conditions. That's what this means going forward. It's on a case-by-case scenario.
Because that you're absolutely right, that there's one of the mechanisms used as a fear-mongering, that we were going to kill industry. The Métis Nation has publicly made a very open statement. We're the largest Indigenous nation in this country. There's 400,000 of us in Western Canada. And we made it very clear, this is not a veto. We're not out to kill industry. And imagine if you're a shareholder and investor, you want to know how your money is going to be well watched and well protected. You don't want to put money into something and all of a sudden find out it's going to be stopped midway or halfway after billions have been invested already. This is a blueprint for clarity. There's no veto here attached to this process. It's very clear. Under Section 35, they still got to consult with us. So it's very clear this is a better example for industry to know, and to the shareholders who invest into these big companies to know full well when they're putting their money into something, it's got the backing of not only the Indigenous governments, but also the federal, provincial, and all parties are involved. So this is a clarity issue, a very clear blueprint. This is not a veto, and we made that public to all industry, and we still stand by the position and always will.
Just to, as an addendum to this, Also, free, prior, and informed consent goes beyond just resource extraction and industry. And C92, in relation to child welfare, that's a perfect example of where free, prior, and informed consent exists and needs to be implemented, and a federal piece of legislation that that is trying its best to do just that. Also, just that modern treaties, and in Inuit Nunangat, our homeland, modern treaties cover all 4 regions of our homeland, that these mechanisms to ensure certainty exist either within the legislation or are negotiated through impact benefit agreements that are laid out within the constitutionally protected land claim agreements. So it already has happened in this country, and we can look at that model as we try to wrestle with these big questions moving forward. Canada's already doing this in many ways. So I think we just need to look to the places where free, prior, and informed consent is actually happening and is being implemented, and work with those examples.
Thank you very much, merci beaucoup. We'll go to the floor, and this will be the last question of the day. Thank you very much. À vous la parole.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jordan Press with the Canadian Press, and I wanted to ask, National Chief Bellegarde, President Obed, President Chartrand, you talked about the process to get this bill, and there were some, and even Minister Lametti, you talked about maybe some of the hiccups that got in the way of trying, as you were preparing this bill. And I'm curious just to give me a sense, maybe from each of you, what are the things that need to, one specific thing that you think needs to get changed? Maybe one thing you have heard from your peoples about something they would like to see that maybe shouldn't be in this bill. I'm just curious to get a sense of what maybe one real important issue that needs to change before this bill becomes law.
Well, in my earlier comments I had, I'll make 4 points in terms of how to make it stronger, and we're always told not to negotiate in public. So I'll be very careful in my words, Minister Lametti. But it is introduced for first reading, and there is a process now to make further amendments to this, the legislative drafting process. So it'll be introduced for second reading, then to committee, and then of course eventually to the Senate, and there'll be recommendations along the way how to strengthen it. So 4 points, and one I spoke to earlier on about. Personally, I believe that the waiting period for national action plan is a little too long. 3 years, a little bit too long. We've waited long enough. So I'll be advocating for a tighter time frame, with the full involvement and inclusions of not only chiefs across Canada, but as well you need to involve industry in the provinces. I get that, but a more robust process. And 3 years for a national action plan is, to me, in my opinion, a little bit long. And then we need the second piece. The bill, it says a minister will be appointed, but it's, to me, a whole of government approach is necessary. So a whole of government approach. I get the point that one minister will be the lead. I get that, and that's important. But there has to be the infrastructure and machinery of government, whole of government approach involved, because this is too important, to lessen it. It's got to be elevated. So that's 2 pieces. The other one was the periodic review. Any good legislation, there should be a periodic review that it's going to be brought back to see what's working, what isn't working. So a time frame for a periodic review. And then to quote Chief Willie Littlechild, Grand Chief Willie Littlechild, his comments about balance and implementation should be in the title as well, because all about the implementation. So there's 4 points, and I know I made a faux pas about publicly negotiating, but you asked the question, so I thought I'd just put that on the record, and we'll see how things go down the road.
David, do you want to go next?
Let me state this. I think you heard the statements being made by Perry Bellegarde on regards to First Nations concerns. We have some similar concerns in regards to oversight approach. How does this get followed through? How does there checks and balances that this bill is actually being followed through with many segments and components, whether it's languages and different pieces that would show that human rights are being addressed in the needs of services. But what we watch for carefully here is this: there is no such thing as a perfect bill yet to ever come before I think Parliament, and this is not one either. But we do know what it means. and we don't know what it will do and how it'll change and how it'll clarify for everybody the role we all will play. And so we are not trying in any way to open up something that somebody will say, well, even the Indigenous people aren't behind this. Even them, they have concerns. And too many times things that apply to Indigenous people have been used as a political ploy by whatever party. And from our perspective, we hope that this is not going to be the case. Even if we say we have little issues or some issue, that all of a sudden somebody's going to raise it in Parliament or some party's going to raise it and say, see, even the Indigenous people have a problem, so we cannot pass this bill until we get it clarified. That is not what we're seeking. In fact, I think we can change things. We've always shown this country that if we look and work hard enough together, we can find a solution for everything. So we are not in any way raising issues of concern on the bill from the Métis Nation side. We do have concerns, but those we believe can all be corrected in the long run as we continue to build this country. So remember, we're a young country. So I think we have a way to go, but let's understand this. I don't want this to be used as a tool that Indigenous people all of a sudden have concerns, and all of a sudden now we can't support this bill because Indigenous people have concerns. You'll always hear that from people. Let's not use this as a political ploy to hurt the Indigenous people. This is about moving forward this country and to show the rest of the world. Not let the world beat us, because we're the leaders in the world on human rights. We're supposed to be.
In the beginning, it took Canada almost a decade to endorse the declaration. And I was there in New York when Minister Bennett gave that endorsement at the United Nations, and I was very proud to be a part of that. But that has historically been where it has all started. And the negative perceptions of the declaration and domestically the application of the declaration in this country have been, I think, meaningfully influenced by the attitude of the Government of Canada in those early days that continues in some of the rhetoric that we see today. Through our ability to work together over the last 9 months or so, we've seen changes to the bill, so it is not an exact replica of 262. And I think that you should take a look at, even in the preambular sections where the meaningful recognition of distinctions, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, the inclusion of MIWG and the TRC as processes that give life to the meaning of this bill, and then also the monitoring and enforcement commitments within the development of the action plan. Because for Inuit, it has always been about, in legal terms, recourse and remedy, the ability for this piece of legislation to make a meaningful difference for somebody whose rights have been violated. Practically, this legislation must find ways for that to happen, and that is what our community wants to see first and foremost.
So as my follow-up, my last question is simply, can you each provide me with a concrete example of how you know that this is, when this becomes law, that it is actually working? There are still obviously significant gaps when it comes to infrastructure for Indigenous peoples, health outcomes, systemic racism when it comes to housing, for example, even in urban environments. Can you maybe each provide me a concrete example of how you know that the yardstick is actually moving, that these rights that you inherently have are actually now being, that you're now receiving them under this law?
I'll start, and I'll just reflect back on C92 as an indicator of what we hope we can achieve with all major policy areas that affect Indigenous people's rights. This federal legislation in regards to child welfare enforces the inherent and existing rights that we have for decision-making over the well-being of our children. And the provisions within that particular act are in keeping with the provisions in the Declaration, and also were developed in co-development with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. That is the type of reality that we hope to see across a number of different areas that previously we had no access to. And we would, like any other Canadian, have to see first readings and be consulted through the legislative process, but had no consideration for our rights and our special status in Canada as Indigenous peoples and our governance models in the way in which the federal government acted, especially through legislation. So I am hopeful that this legislation will keep that momentum that we started in the last Parliament, and I think it can be hugely significant to the betterment of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples in this country.
Does David want to go?
Sure. Thank you very much. Again, thank you for the question, Canadian Press. I think let's look at what this whole transition of change occurred and how it was seen as, I used the word earlier, as the boogeyman, and that parties were using it for different purposes, and it was seen that it was going to kill industry. Now, I don't see anybody in the opposite parties that are going to be saying, oh, we don't like the idea of languages being introduced or child welfare. Most of the discussions and debate and fear has always been to scare industry, to scare provinces, to scare those investors. And that's what I think we have now moved away from that. I think there's more clarity by industry out there. They better understand it now. They know it's not a veto. So we see this bill as, once it's in Royal Assent is in play, it's a clear blueprint. We know now at the end of the day that if a mining is coming, for example, in Manitoba, they're going to be calling the Métis Federation government saying, look, 10 years in advance, how do we work together to build this mine in your province, at the same time protecting your environment? How do we come to a conclusion of all sitting at the table and finding that solution? So the blueprint here is really clear. It's something that was desperately needed in this country. And because as you heard earlier, too many court cases, millions upon millions and hundreds of millions throughout the years being spent in the courts. And that's not the way this country should be evolving itself. Where judges have already said that. Quit going to the courts. Do your job, politicians. Do your job now and negotiate these things together. Courts have already warned us over and over. So I think it's time. This blueprint is really essential, and the fear-mongering will come to an end. And again, I thank you for the question, because at the end of the day, what did they attack? Industry. They don't care really much about other stuff of it that's inside there. I don't see that from opposition parties anyway. But what I do hear is the fear of how it's going to destroy the entire economy of our country, which is absolutely 100% not true.
That's a very good question that you asked. And when you think about it, and you look at the bill, Bill C-15, and I made comments earlier on about how the implementation of the bill, it condemns racist doctrines that underlie the policies and actions like the residential school system and the imposition of the Indian Act that have caused so much harm to our people. The implementation of the bill explicitly requires concrete action to end systemic racism and other forms of discrimination. We all know what happened in the healthcare system with Joyce Echaquan. There's systemic racism in the healthcare system right across Canada. You've just witnessed the report from Mary Ellen Trepel-Lafond in BC. So it's across. So ending that healthcare discrimination, systemic. We've seen what's happening in the policing and the justice system. We're 5% of the population, but the jails are full of First Nations men. Even worse for First Nations women, it's higher per capita. Ending that. 40,000 First Nations children in foster care. Ending that. So within the educational systems, same thing. Caps on education, in school. So this bill is about ending systemic racism and discrimination. And when you do that, that gap that I continually talk about starts to close. That socioeconomic gap that exists. And so when that closes, you not only benefit First Nations people or Métis people or Inuit peoples, you benefit Canada as a whole. And that's what this bill means. You're closing that gap and ending systemic discrimination in recognition of fundamental human rights. And that's what it means. So it's very important. And those are concrete examples that this bill will help in different sectors. In the healthcare sector, the justice, First Nations policing sector, and it's like, and we've talked about moving away from a punitive justice system to, and it's not even restorative, it's a transformative justice system. And so there's lots that can be done, but it really is about closing that gap. And so to me, it's a very good day for first reading, because now there's a path towards reconciliation. It's going to take some hard work, but I believe it can be done by bringing everybody together. The federal government, First Nations governments, Métis governments, Inuit, provinces, everybody. That's what this means.
If I could just put my 2 cents in, I'll know we're succeeding when the processes for whatever piece of legislation incorporate a dialogue with Indigenous peoples, which has become second nature, where we don't have to think about it anymore. When President Obed says that free, prior, and informed consent is more than just about natural resources, he's absolutely right. It's about the way in which we talk to each other, and we get consent, and we have partnership, and we have dialogue. When we no longer have to think about that, when it just becomes the way we do things naturally, then I'll know we've succeeded. We're getting there. There are some points, but we still have to think it through, and we need to get there naturally. That's what reconciliation is. Look, read the Declaration. It's about human rights. I can't repeat that often enough. It's about education. It's about rights to language and culture and self-determination. Things that in Canada we talk about all the time and we defend all the time. Well, let's defend it for everybody in Canada. We've had 150 years of a colonial system. This is a step, a big step. Willie Littlechild said in a conversation with me, we're now all at the starting line again, and we still have a race to run, but at least we're going to run it together. So we're at a starting line, putting 150 plus years, longer than that, of colonialism and the impact of colonialism behind us. Let's move to a different model. This is a transformative step to help us move to that model, and hopefully we have a legacy. I don't know, National Chief, I think you have some grandchildren. President Obed and I don't yet, but maybe down the road, and hopefully our grandchildren, your grandchildren, President Chartrand's grandchildren, all of our grandchildren would be able to enjoy a Canada in which everybody's human rights are respected.
Okay.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
French colleagues who aren't here? Can you repeat en français?
Ce que je viens de dire?
Oui.
Donc, moi, je crois sincèrement que nous allons connaître du succès, où ça va être traité comme une réussite, quand les processus de dialogue sont normalisés, quand c'est un réflexe habituel dans la façon dont on fait n'importe quoi dans le pays, quand n'importe quel projet de loi, n'importe quel aspect de la relation entre les peuples autochtones et les peuples non autochtones. Donc, quand ce processus n'a plus besoin d'une réflexion particulière, quand c'est normal, je pense que nous avons réussi. On a des exemples. On est sur le chemin, sur le bon chemin. Willie Littlechild a dit, c'est comme le départ d'une course, mais nous le ferons ensemble. Mais on doit écarter plus que 150 ans de colonialisme pour avoir quelque chose d'autre, de respect, de partenariat, pour avoir un patrimoine pour nos enfants, nos petits-enfants. Et je termine, c'est sur les droits de la personne. Il faut reconnaître que les droits de la personne vaut pour tout le monde, autochtone et non autochtone. Et j'aimerais avoir un Canada où ça s'applique à tout le monde et pas uniquement aux non autochtones.
C'est bon.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le ministre. Tout le monde, ça met fin à notre conférence de presse. Thank you very much. Now it's the close of our press conference. And have a great day.